There are moments in life that cleave time in two, before and after. For Natasha Richardson, one such moment arrived tucked inside an elegant cream-colored envelope, delivered by a silent courier to her quiet, unassuming apartment. It was a physical thing, weighty in her hands, yet its true impact was purely psychological, a heavy blow from a past she had meticulously tried to outrun. Her fingers, usually steady, trembled slightly as she traced the expensive letterhead, an embossed design she recognized instantly. It was the logo of the company that had once been theirs, a symbol of a shared dream now belonging solely to a man who had not only broken her heart, but had systematically stripped her of everything else. The irony was a bitter taste on her tongue, metallic and cold. Inside, the invitation was a masterpiece of subtle aggression. Gold lettering, formal language, requesting her esteemed presence at the annual charity gala hosted by Benjamin Richardson, her ex-husband, and his new wife, Brittany. Each word felt carefully chosen, a deliberate jab. An evening of celebration and giving back to the community, black tie required, please RSVP by Friday. It was the kind of event she used to plan, the kind of world she once inhabited. Now it felt like an alien landscape, a glittering cage designed to trap her memories. But what truly twisted her stomach was just the stark reminder of what she had lost. It was the handwritten note at the bottom, scrawled in Benjamin's familiar, confident hand. "Natasha, I thought you might enjoy seeing how far we've come. It would be wonderful to catch up on old times. I'm sure you'll find the evening enlightening. Benjamin." She knew that tone. Oh, how intimately she knew it. It was the same condescending voice he used when he wanted to make her feel small, insignificant, utterly dependent. The same voice that had echoed in her mind 3 years ago when he, in a moment of chilling cruelty, told her she would never amount to anything without him. It was the voice that had haunted her through those dark, desperate months when her entire worldly possession consisted of $27 in her bank account and a single suitcase filled with the remnants of her old life. Natasha laid the invitation on her modest kitchen table, its opulence a stark contrast to the chipped laminate. She walked to the window of her simple one-bedroom apartment, gazing out at the familiar cityscape. To any casual observer, watching her move through this quiet life, it would seem Benjamin had been absolutely right. Her apartment was humble. Her car was practical. Her clothes were functional rather than fashionable. She lived without fanfare, without ostentation, without any hint of the glittering success Benjamin now paraded. But what Benjamin didn't know, what not a single soul in their old social circle suspected, was that the woman he had discarded like so much refuse, the woman he had pronounced worthless, now controlled an empire worth over $200 million. His belief in her continued struggle was a comforting illusion, a shield behind which she had built her quiet, formidable power. A ghost of a smile, cold and sharp as winter air, touched her lips. She picked up her phone and dialed. "Patricia, I need you to clear my schedule for Saturday night." "The Henderson Industries Gala, ma'am?" Patricia Collins, her executive assistant, responded, her voice a model of crisp efficiency. "But ma'am, you own Henderson Industries. Shouldn't you be hosting?" Natasha's smile deepened, a silent inward triumph. "Actually, Patricia," she replied, her voice smooth, almost melodic, "I think I'll attend as a guest this time. And Patricia, make sure Benjamin Richardson's contracts with all our subsidiary companies are ready for review Monday morning. All of them, ma'am." "Every single one," Patricia confirmed, her tone betraying a hint of understanding, a subtle acknowledgement of the game afoot. As Natasha hung up, she looked at the invitation again, no longer with a tremor, but with a gaze of unshakable resolve. Benjamin had no idea that Sterling Enterprises, the anonymous holding company that discreetly owned 40%, no, closer to 43% now, of his business contracts, belonged to the woman he had so cruelly humiliated and cast aside. He was completely oblivious that the quiet, substantial charity donations keeping his favorite causes funded originated from her accounts. He had no clue that the woman he imagined was struggling to make ends meet, perhaps even working a mundane, low-paying job, could buy and sell his entire company 10 times over without blinking. That invitation, carefully penned, was meant to be a knife in her back, a public declaration of his victory and her perceived defeat. Benjamin intended to parade his new wealth, his new wife, his soaring success, all in front of her. He wanted her to witness everything she had supposedly lost when he chose his young secretary over his wife of 8 years. He craved the sight of her broken, desperate, perhaps even grateful for any crumbs of attention he might deign to throw her way. What he was going to get instead was a reckoning, a truth he was utterly unprepared for. Natasha's mind drifted back, as it often did, to the last time she had seen Benjamin before the Gala invitation shattered the fragile peace of her new life. It was in their divorce lawyer's office, a sterile, hushed room that felt colder than any operating theater. Benjamin sat smugly, radiating an air of self-satisfied triumph, his hand possessively placed on Brittany's visibly growing belly. Brittany, too, was beaming, her youthful face bright with a victory she had not earned, only inherited. Benjamin had looked at Natasha then, not with anger, but with an open disdain so profound it made her feel like something vile he had scraped off his expensive shoe. "You'll never survive without me," he had sneered as they signed the papers that effectively gave him everything. Their beautiful home, the luxury cars, the successful business they had built together, even her grandmother's antique jewelry. You don't have what it takes to make it in the real world. Brittany had giggled softly, a sound like glass shards in Natasha's ears. She was only 23 then, fresh out of college, completely infatuated with Benjamin's money and status, blind to the human cost of her newfound luxury. She had looked at Natasha like she was an old, worn-out relic, finally being replaced by something newer, shinier, and undeniably better. Natasha's lawyer, a kind but ultimately outmatched man she could barely afford, had pushed the final papers across the polished table. Benjamin got everything because, technically, the business was in his name. Natasha had been too trusting, too naive, too deeply in love to protect herself legally. She had walked out of that office with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Yet, amidst the profound sense of loss, she also walked out with something Benjamin had never recognized in her, something he had deliberately tried to extinguish: a fire. A quiet, fierce, unyielding fire that, once ignited by betrayal, could not be put out. Now, 3 years later, as she held that insidious invitation, she wasn't looking at a summons to her public defeat. She was looking at an invitation to her own triumph. Benjamin believed he was inviting a victim to witness his success. Instead, he was unknowingly inviting the puppet master who now controlled his strings, the architect of his unspoken dependence. Natasha poured herself a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon, the deep red liquid mirroring the dark resolve in her eyes. It was time to plan her return to high society, not as a former wife, but as a force to be reckoned with. She would need the perfect dress, an entrance that spoke volumes without a single word, and the perfect moment to reveal the truth. She wanted to savor every agonizing second of Benjamin's realization that he hadn't just thrown away a wife. He had thrown away the very foundation of his success, the best thing that had ever happened to him, and in doing so, had unwittingly laid the groundwork for her own empire. She allowed herself a brief, fleeting moment to remember all the nights she had cried herself to sleep, the pillow damp with tears of despair and confusion, all the days she had worked multiple soul-crushing jobs just to afford food, to keep a roof over her head, all the agonizing hours she had doubted herself, wondering if Benjamin had been right, if she truly was worthless without him. Those days were over. Saturday night wouldn't just be an event. It would be her declaration of independence, her proclamation of war, her ultimate act of self-reclamation. And Benjamin, utterly blinded by his own towering ego, had no idea what was coming for him. The memory of Benjamin's betrayal hit Natasha like a physical blow every time she allowed herself to wander back to that day, even years later. It was etched into her mind with a clarity that time had failed to diminish. She had come home early from visiting her sick mother, a rare treat she had eagerly anticipated. Her heart had bubbled with a simple domestic joy, excited to surprise Benjamin with his favorite dinner, a slow-cooked osso buco, a dish she knew he adored. The house, their beautiful, sprawling home that she had poured her heart and soul into decorating, was unusually quiet when she entered. Too quiet. A prickle of unease, faint but persistent, stirred within her. Then she heard voices upstairs, indistinct but unmistakably from their bedroom. A sudden cold dread seized her. She climbed the grand staircase slowly, each step feeling weighted, her mind racing through plausible explanations. Perhaps Benjamin was on a business call, a late conference with overseas clients. But as she drew closer, the voices sharpened, becoming two distinct tones, one male, one female, and they certainly weren't discussing quarterly reports or market trends. The door to their bedroom was slightly ajar. Through the narrow crack, a sliver of her carefully constructed world shattered. She saw Benjamin and Brittany, his young secretary, entwined in their marriage bed, the bed where she and Benjamin had made love, where they had whispered dreams of a future filled with children and shared triumphs, where she had imagined their lives unfolding in perfect harmony. Brittany, so young, so impossibly beautiful, her blonde hair catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows, seemed to glow with an illicit vitality. She was everything Natasha wasn't anymore, or at least everything Benjamin now perceived her not to be. Young, carefree, seemingly completely devoted to Benjamin's every word and whim. As Natasha watched, frozen in horror, unable to move or breathe, she heard Brittany whisper, her voice soft and seductive, "When are you going to leave her? I'm tired of hiding." Benjamin's response, delivered with a casual dismissiveness that twisted a knife in Natasha's gut, destroyed what little was left of her world. "Soon, baby. I'm just waiting for the right moment. Once I figure out how to keep the business and the house, she'll be gone. She doesn't contribute anything anyway. You're the one who makes me happy." Natasha recoiled from the door silently, her heart pounding so loud she was sure they must hear its frantic rhythm. Her lungs burned for air, but she couldn't seem to draw a full breath. She backed away, down the stairs, out the front door, grabbed her purse and keys from the hall table, and fled. She drove aimlessly around the city for hours, the familiar streets blurring through a haze of shock and tears, trying desperately to process what she had seen and heard. The betrayal was so complete, so utter that her mind struggled to comprehend it. When she finally returned home that evening, the house was a mausoleum of broken dreams. Benjamin was in his study, sitting at his imposing mahogany desk, acting as if nothing had happened. He greeted her with a casual kiss on the cheek, inquired about her mother's health, and sat across from her at dinner, recounting his day at the office with practiced normalcy. Never once did he mention that his secretary had spent the afternoon in their marriage bed, in the very heart of their home. For 3 agonizing weeks, Natasha lived in a horrible limbo, suspended between knowing and pretending. She knew the truth, yet she couldn't bring herself to confront it. A desperate part of her kept hoping it was all a nightmare, a cruel figment of her imagination. She watched Benjamin and Brittany at company events, noting the lingering glances, the clandestine touches, the way Brittany's hand would brush his arm when she handed him documents, a gesture that spoke volumes. Each observation chipped away at her soul, confirming the devastating reality. The end finally came on a Tuesday morning, a day that forever marked the boundary between her old life and her involuntary new one. Natasha was making breakfast, the comforting aroma of coffee and toast filling the kitchen, when Benjamin sat down at the table. He held a cup of coffee, but his expression was serious, uncharacteristically devoid of his usual morning cheer. "Natasha, we need to talk." She had known this moment was coming, had anticipated it with a dreadful certainty, yet hearing the words still felt like a physical punch to her stomach. She turned off the stove, the sizzling bacon a sudden jarring silence in the room, and sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap, her face carefully neutral. "I want a divorce," he said simply, his voice devoid of emotion. "This marriage isn't working anymore. We've grown apart, and I think it's best if we go our separate ways." "Is there someone else?" she asked quietly, the words barely a whisper. even though she already knew the devastating answer. Benjamin looked uncomfortable for a moment, a flicker of guilt crossing his face before he quickly masked it with a dismissive shrug. That's not really relevant. What matters is that we're done. The divorce proceedings that followed were swift and brutally efficient. Benjamin, always a shrewd businessman, had expensive lawyers, formidable legal sharks who found every possible loophole to prove that everything they had built together legally belonged to him. The business, the Richardson Group, was in his name. The house, registered solely to him. Even the car she drove every day, her lifeline to independence, was registered to him. Natasha's lawyer, a kind but ultimately outmatched man she could barely afford, tried his best. But Benjamin's team was too good, too ruthless. They painted Natasha as a woman who had contributed nothing to their success, a wife content to live off her husband's hard work while offering nothing in return. It was a lie, a cruel and calculated distortion of the truth. Natasha had worked just as hard as Benjamin to build their marketing company from the ground up. She had handled the creative side, the visionary spark that brought in their biggest clients, while he managed the business operations. Her innovative ideas, her captivating designs, her uncanny ability to understand client needs. These were the driving forces behind their most successful campaigns. But none of that mattered in the cold, unfeeling world of legal proceedings because she had been too trusting, too naive, too deeply in love to demand her name on the paperwork, to protect her contributions legally. The final excruciating blow came when Brittany showed up to the last court session, brazen and triumphant. Obviously pregnant, she sat behind Benjamin like a prize he had won, her hand resting delicately on her belly, a saccharine smile of false sympathy directed at Natasha. After the judge signed the final papers, making her an unperson in Benjamin's life, he approached Natasha in the sterile courthouse hallway. "I want you to know this wasn't personal," he said, the words dripping with a chilling hypocrisy. "You're a good person, Natasha. You'll find someone who appreciates you, someone more suited to your level." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable, a final, cruel parting shot. He was telling her without ambiguity that she wasn't good enough for the life they had built together, that she belonged with someone simpler, someone with lower expectations, someone beneath him. That night, Natasha sat alone in a cheap, impersonal motel room, the kind found on the outskirts of every city, with her single suitcase and a paltry $27 in cash. She had no family except her elderly mother, no friends who weren't also inextricably linked to Benjamin's orbit, and no job experience outside of the company she could no longer be a part of. She could have given up. She could have let Benjamin's cruel words become her bitter reality. She could have crumbled, disappeared, become the statistic of a discarded wife. Instead, in the suffocating silence of that lonely room, a fierce, primal promise ignited within her. She would not just survive, she would thrive. And someday, Benjamin would regret every callous word he had spoken to her, every ounce of pain he had inflicted. She just never imagined that someday would arrive with such breathtaking speed and devastating precision. The first month after the divorce was, without exaggeration, the hardest of Natasha's life. The cheap motel room was a temporary purgatory. Soon, she found a tiny studio apartment in a rough, neglected neighborhood, the only place she could afford with her severely limited savings. The walls were thin as paper, offering no privacy, allowing the sounds of her neighbors' arguments and laughter to bleed into her own quiet despair at all hours of the night. The plumbing was temperamental, the windows rattled in the wind, and the air always carried a faint, lingering smell of stale cooking and desperation. She took any job she could find, any opportunity that promised a meager wage. In the mornings, she worked at a bustling coffee shop, a nameless barista, expertly crafting lattes and cappuccinos for a relentless stream of business people who rushed past her, eyes averted, without making eye contact, without acknowledging her existence. In the afternoons, she became a phantom cleaner in towering office buildings, scrubbing toilets, emptying overflowing trash cans, dusting desks that would be cluttered again by morning. At night, The fluorescent glow of a call center was her domain, where she dealt with the endless barrage of angry, frustrated customers, their voices amplified and distorted through the phone, yelling at her for problems she hadn't caused. Every single dollar mattered, every penny was hoarded. Her diet consisted primarily of instant ramen noodles and generic, tasteless cereal for weeks on end. She walked everywhere, miles upon miles each day, to save the meager bus fare. Her clothes were bought from thrift stores, faded and ill-fitting, and she quickly learned to repair everything herself. A loose button, a frayed hem, a small tear, because replacing anything was an unthinkable luxury. But the hardest part, she realized, wasn't the physical poverty, the relentless exhaustion, or the soul-crushing anonymity. It was the profound loneliness, a vast, echoing emptiness that no amount of busy work could fill. And worse, it was the constant, insidious voice in her head, a familiar cadence that sounded exactly like Benjamin's, whispering that she wasn't good enough, that she would never amount to anything, that she was destined to struggle forever in the shadows. He had chipped away at her self-worth for so long that his judgment had become an internal tormentor. 3 months into her new, harsh reality, something subtly but profoundly changed. One late night, as she cleaned the deserted offices of a small, nondescript investment firm, she overheard a phone conversation between 2 senior partners. Their voices, hushed but urgent, carried through the thin office walls. They were discussing a high-net-worth client, a man on the brink of losing a fortune because the firm's experts simply couldn't grasp the unpredictable market trends, couldn't foresee the impending downturns. Natasha had always possessed a hidden talent, a quiet aptitude for numbers and patterns. In college, before Benjamin had convinced her to focus solely on their budding marketing firm's creative side, she had studied business and finance, a passion she had set aside for love. As she listened, an intricate web of solutions, an alternative strategy, began to form in her mind, clear and precise. She saw what their team of experts, trapped in conventional thinking, had missed. The solution wasn't revolutionary, it was simply a different perspective, a more intuitive understanding of risk and opportunity. The next morning, driven by a flicker of the old fire she thought had been extinguished, she did something that terrified her to her core. She called the investment firm and, with a pounding heart, asked to speak to one of the partners she had overheard, Robert Chin. When he came on the line, she introduced herself, not as a former marketing executive, but simply as the cleaning woman. Then, with a voice she struggled to keep steady, she asked if she could share an idea, a different insight, about their client's rapidly depreciating portfolio. Robert Chin, a man of rigid conventions and impeccable pedigree, was initially annoyed, perhaps even insulted. A cleaning woman offering investment advice? It was absurd. But there was something in Natasha's voice, a quiet confidence despite the unusual circumstances, that made him pause. Perhaps it was desperation. The client was threatening to pull all his money. But he listened. Natasha, calm and articulate, explained her analysis of the prevailing market trends, the subtle shifts she had observed, and meticulously outlined a strategy that, she believed, could not only save their client's investment, but even turn a profit. Robert, a man of logic and numbers, remained skeptical, but the client's escalating threats left him few options. So, against his better judgment, he decided to try Natasha's suggestion, a long shot born of desperation. 2 weeks later, the client's portfolio had not only regained everything he had lost, but had surged ahead, exceeding all expectations. Robert Chin, bewildered and intrigued, called Natasha and asked her to come in for a formal meeting, not to clean, but to talk. "I don't understand," he said, sitting across from her in his expensive, tastefully appointed office, the very epitome of corporate success. He gestured around at the framed diplomas, the expensive art, the panoramic view of the city skyline. "You're a cleaning woman with no formal training in investment strategy, no university degrees in finance. How did you see what my team of seasoned experts, with their MBAs and decades of experience, completely missed?" Natasha looked around the office, absorbing the symbols of institutional success, the very things that had once defined Benjamin's world. Maybe, she said, her voice soft but clear, because I don't think like an expert. I think like someone who can't afford to lose. Her perspective was unburdened by academic dogma or established biases. She saw the raw data, the human behavior driving the market, with a clarity born of necessity. Impressed and astonished, Robert offered her a job as a junior analyst. The pay was barely more than what she made at her 3 other jobs combined, a sum that still barely covered her basic living expenses. But it was a start, a foot in the door, a glimmer of opportunity. She immediately quit the coffee shop and the call center, but stubbornly kept cleaning offices at night. She needed every dollar, and the extra work fueled her relentless pursuit of knowledge, allowing her to stay connected to the real world while learning the intricacies of high finance. For 6 grueling months, she worked 18-hour days, devouring every piece of information she could. She read every book on finance, economics, and market strategy she could get her hands on from the public library, often reading late into the night until her eyes burned with exhaustion. She studied market reports, financial statements, and economic forecasts until the numbers blurred. She asked questions that often made her more experienced colleagues snicker or roll their eyes, questions they considered elementary or naive, but she didn't care. She had nothing to lose and everything to gain. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to excel. Her instincts about market trends were not just good, they were almost supernatural. She could spot emerging opportunities and hidden risks that others, blinded by their conventional frameworks, completely missed. Within a year, she was handling major client accounts, making more money than she had ever imagined possible, a testament to her innate talent and fierce dedication. But Natasha wasn't content with merely being successful at someone else's company, however prestigious. The fire within her, the one that Benjamin had tried to extinguish, now burned with a new ambition. She began saving every penny she could, not for luxuries, but for something bigger, something entirely her own. She started making small, calculated investments of her own, turning hundreds into thousands, then thousands into tens of thousands. Each successful venture was a quiet victory, a confirmation of her capabilities. 2 years after starting at the investment firm, she had saved enough capital through sheer discipline and shrewd investment to start her own company. She named it Sterling Enterprises, choosing a name that sounded established, trustworthy, and subtly powerful, yet revealed absolutely nothing about who she was or the incredible journey that had brought her there. She started small, methodically buying struggling businesses, the forgotten and undervalued gems that others had dismissed as failures. She possessed an uncanny gift for seeing potential where others saw only decline, for breathing new life into neglected assets. Within 6 months, Sterling Enterprises owned 5 small companies, each meticulously selected and strategically revitalized. Within a year, that number had swelled to 15. Natasha was exceedingly careful to keep her identity a complete secret. All business transactions, acquisitions, and negotiations were conducted through a carefully constructed network of trusted lawyers and anonymous representatives. She never appeared at board meetings, never attended public events, never allowed her name to be associated with Sterling Enterprises. To the wider business world, Sterling Enterprises was an enigma, a powerful yet mysterious figure operating from the shadows, preferring to stay out of the spotlight. This anonymity served her incredibly well. It allowed her to move freely through the cutthroat world of corporate finance without anyone connecting her to Benjamin Richardson's discarded ex-wife. It also meant she could keep a watchful eye on Benjamin's firm, the Richardson Group, without him ever knowing he was under surveillance. As Sterling Enterprises grew, Natasha strategically ensured that she acquired companies that did substantial business with Benjamin's firm. Slowly, subtly, she became one of his biggest clients, a silent, powerful force signing his paychecks, providing the very lifeblood of his company without him ever suspecting her true identity. She watched from the shadows as Benjamin and Brittany reveled in their perceived success, their opulent lifestyle splashed across society pages. She saw the newspaper articles detailing their charitable endeavors, their extravagant vacations, their beautiful new house, a tangible monument to Benjamin's inflated ego. She knew about Brittany's insatiable shopping habits, Benjamin's golf tournaments, their ambitious plans to expand the business into new markets. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly fathom, was that nearly 43% of their burgeoning revenue, the very foundation of their lavish empire, came from contracts with companies ultimately owned by the woman Benjamin had so ruthlessly discarded. They were, in essence, building their grand edifice on the very foundation of Natasha's silent, unacknowledged success, and they were utterly, blissfully unaware. As she meticulously prepared to attend Benjamin's charity gala, the culmination of her 3-year plan, Natasha reflected on how impossibly far she had come. 3 years ago, she had been broken, defeated, stripped of everything. Now she controlled more wealth, more influence, and more power than Benjamin could ever possibly imagine. The scared, helpless woman who had left that courthouse with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart had transformed through grit, brilliance, and an unshakable will into a business mogul who could, quite literally, buy and sell Benjamin's entire world. The transformation was complete. Now it was time for the revelation. Natasha's corner office, situated on the 42nd floor of the gleaming Sterling building, offered a panoramic, breathtaking view of the entire city. From her floor-to-ceiling windows, she could survey the entire sprawling business district, including the more modest 15-story building where Benjamin Richardson's marketing firm proudly occupied 3 floors. She often stood at this window in the quiet solitude of the early morning, sipping her meticulously brewed coffee, watching the tiny figures hurrying to work below, a silent, powerful observer. Sometimes a flicker of dark amusement would cross her face as she wondered if Benjamin ever looked up at the imposing Sterling building, if he ever idly wondered who owned the anonymous corporate tower that now dominated the city skyline. The building bore no external signs, no flashy logos indicating Sterling Enterprises headquarters. To most people, it was just another anonymous, gleaming corporate monument. But inside those impeccably designed walls, Natasha commanded an empire that touched nearly every aspect of the modern business world. Sterling Enterprises now owned 47 diverse companies across 12 different industries, a testament to her vision and strategic prowess. They ranged from nimble tech startups revolutionizing digital communication to established manufacturing firms, from bespoke consulting agencies catering to Fortune 500 clients to major retail chains that shaped consumer trends. The beauty, and indeed the genius, of her business model lay in its invisibility, its almost surgical precision. Each acquired company operated independently, maintaining its original name, its distinctive brand identity, and its existing management structure. The only thing that changed was the ultimate ownership, and that crucial information was meticulously buried within dense legal documents, labyrinthine corporate filings that few people, particularly not Benjamin, ever bothered to examine. "Ma'am, your 9 o'clock is here," Patricia announced through the intercom, her voice crisp and efficient, pulling Natasha from her contemplative reverie. Patricia Collins, Natasha's executive assistant, was a sharp, astute woman in her late 50s. She had joined Sterling Enterprises in its embryonic days, recognizing Natasha's nascent genius, and now expertly helped manage the intricate, complex web of companies and investments that formed the Sterling empire. "Send him in," Natasha replied, settling behind her expansive, polished mahogany desk, its surface gleaming in the morning light. The man who entered was Thomas Williams, the distinguished CEO of Henderson Industries, one of Sterling's largest and most profitable subsidiary companies. Henderson Industries happened to be Benjamin Richardson's biggest client, providing extensive marketing services for Henderson's prestigious chain of luxury hotels. Thomas was one of the very few individuals who knew Sterling's true anonymous owner, and their professional relationship had, over time, subtly evolved into something approaching a deep, mutual respect and even friendship. "Natasha, thank you for seeing me," Thomas said, taking a seat across from her desk, his expression serious. "What's on your mind, Thomas?" Natasha asked, her gaze direct, attentive. It's about the Richardson Group contract, he began, a note of frustration in his voice. I've been reviewing their work for our upcoming spring campaign, and frankly, I'm not impressed. Their creative team seems to have lost their edge. The campaign they proposed for our new resort launch is generic, uninspiring, utterly lacking the innovation we expect from a top-tier agency. Natasha leaned back slightly in her chair, considering this information, a quiet satisfaction stirring within her. What do you recommend? I think it's time to seriously consider other options, Thomas stated, a hint of steel in his tone. There are several agencies out there that could deliver far better, more impactful work for the same price, if not less. Richardson Group, I'm afraid, has been coasting on their past reputation for far too long. That's interesting, Natasha said carefully, her mind connecting the dots. I understand Richardson Group was once known for truly innovative campaigns. What changed, in your opinion? Thomas shrugged, a gesture of genuine perplexity. Hard to say, Natasha. Maybe success simply made them complacent, lazy even, or perhaps they never truly possessed the inherent creative spark people once attributed to them. Their best work, the campaigns that genuinely revolutionized the industry, were actually produced several years ago, back when they had a different creative director, a different guiding vision. Natasha's smile was cold, almost imperceptible. His ex-wife, you mean? Yes, that's right, Thomas confirmed, a spark of recognition in his eyes. I heard she left the company during the divorce. A real shame, actually. Her campaigns were truly brilliant, ahead of their time. The work they've produced since then has been, well, mediocre at best, lacking that unique spark. I see, Natasha murmured, the irony almost too potent to bear. Well, Thomas, I trust your judgment implicitly. If you believe it's time to explore other options, then that's precisely what we should do. But let's not rush into anything. Take your time to thoroughly research alternatives. We want the best for Henderson, after all. After Thomas left, Natasha returned to her window, gazing out at the bustling city. She could clearly see people streaming into the Richardson Group building, tiny figures hurrying to their morning meetings. Somewhere in that building, Benjamin was likely reviewing quarterly reports, completely oblivious that his biggest client, the very source of a significant portion of his wealth and prestige, was actively considering dropping him. The irony was, indeed, delicious, a meticulously crafted dish she was about to serve. Benjamin, in his arrogance, had thrown away his most valuable asset, his creative heart, when he divorced her. Natasha had been the creative force, the visionary mind behind their most successful campaigns, the one who intuitively understood client needs and consistently delivered groundbreaking results. Benjamin, by contrast, had been merely the public face of the company, the charming schmoozer who wined and dined clients and sealed deals with a handshake. But the real talent, the true genius, had been hers, quietly, consistently delivering exceptional work. Now, without her, he was visibly struggling to maintain that success, to conjure the magic that had once been effortless. And his biggest client, a client he didn't even know was ultimately controlled by his worthless ex-wife, was rapidly losing confidence in his abilities, in his very capacity to deliver. Natasha's phone rang, a sharp jolt interrupting her thoughts. Yes, Patricia. Ma'am, I have the final RSVPs for Mr. Richardson's Gala, Patricia reported. It looks like it's going to be quite the event. The guest list includes some of the biggest names in business and politics. Anyone we know? Natasha asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. Actually, yes. At least a dozen CEOs from companies we either own or do significant business with, including Thomas Williams from Henderson Industries. Natasha smiled, a genuine anticipatory smile this time. Perfect. What about my dress for the evening? The designer will be here at 3 for the final fitting, Patricia confirmed. The jewelry is ready for pickup and the car will be available whenever you need it. Excellent. Oh, and Patricia, I want you to prepare a comprehensive report on all of Sterling's business relationships with the Richardson Group. Include every subsidiary company, every single contract, and every payment made over the past 2 years. All of it, every minute detail. I want to know exactly how much of Benjamin's success depends on our money, precisely how deeply he is entangled. After hanging up, Natasha opened her laptop and pulled up the financial reports for Richardson Group. The cold, hard numbers told a story Benjamin probably didn't fully understand, a narrative of quiet, insidious dependence. Over the past 2 years, an astonishing 43% of his total revenue had come directly from companies owned by Sterling Enterprises. Without those crucial contracts, his business, the one he so proudly showcased, would be struggling desperately to stay afloat, a ship taking on water. She thought about the arrogant note Benjamin had scrawled on the Gala invitation. "I thought you might enjoy seeing how far we've come." The sheer, unadulterated hubris of that statement still amazed her. He truly wanted to show off his success to the woman he firmly believed was still struggling to make ends meet, perhaps even hoping she would be impressed by his continued ascent. He wanted to rub her face in everything she had supposedly lost when he chose Brittany over her, to remind her of her perceived insignificance. What he didn't realize, what he couldn't possibly conceive, was that his success, his very ability to maintain his lavish lifestyle, was meticulously built on her foundation. She was the puppet master, and he, in his blissful ignorance, was dancing precisely to her tune. Natasha pulled up another file on her computer, a detailed, meticulously compiled dossier on Benjamin and Brittany's personal life. She knew about their inflated mortgage payments, their multiple car loans, their escalating credit card bills. She knew that despite their flashy lifestyle, their constant public displays of opulence, they were actually highly leveraged, teetering precariously on the brink, dependent on the continued uninterrupted success of the business. She knew that Brittany spent more on designer clothes and extravagant jewelry each month than most people made in a year, a black hole of consumption. She knew that Benjamin had started drinking more heavily since the divorce, perhaps struggling to cope with a pervasive stress he didn't fully understand, a gnawing anxiety he couldn't quite articulate. She knew from her careful observations that their marriage wasn't nearly as happy or as stable as it appeared in the carefully curated society pages. Knowledge, she had learned, was power, and Natasha possessed more intimate, incriminating knowledge about Benjamin's life, both personal and professional, than he could possibly imagine. She had been watching, waiting, and meticulously planning for the perfect, most opportune moment to reveal herself. That moment, after 3 long, arduous years, was finally here. The designer boutique on Fifth Avenue was the kind of establishment Natasha never could have afforded 3 years ago. A temple of haute couture she would have walked past with wistful admiration. Now, with a quiet, ironic satisfaction, she owned the very building it was housed in, though the boutique's effusive owner had absolutely no idea her anonymous, powerful landlord was standing in the opulent dressing room, trying on gowns. "This one is absolutely stunning, Mrs. Richardson," Marianne, the head designer, cooed, her voice a symphony of professional admiration as she adjusted the flowing midnight blue gown. "The cut is perfect for your figure, and the color brings out your skin tone beautifully. It's exquisite." Natasha studied herself in the 3-way mirror. The gown was elegant without being overtly flashy, expensive without screaming for attention. It made her look sophisticated, powerful, and undeniably successful, but not in a way that would immediately announce the sheer magnitude of her wealth. She wanted Benjamin to see her and think she looked good, perhaps even surprisingly so, but not so devastatingly successful that he would immediately suspect she was doing astronomically better than he had ever intended. She aimed for a subtle, unsettling triumph. "It's perfect," she decided, the words a quiet, firm affirmation. "I'll take it." "Excellent choice, Mrs. Richardson. Now let's talk about accessories. We have some truly magnificent pieces that would complement this ensemble perfectly." 2 hours later, Natasha left the boutique with everything she needed for the gala. The dress, the shoes, the carefully chosen jewelry. Each item was selected with precision, designed to send the right, carefully calibrated message. She wanted to project the image of a woman who had rebuilt her life, successfully, gracefully, but not so overwhelmingly successfully that it would immediately shatter Benjamin's carefully constructed narrative about her supposed inferiority, her struggles after him. Her next stop was the salon, a sanctuary of luxurious pampering, where her stylist Marcus, not the Marcus from her forbidden list of old friends, but Marcus Thompson, a renowned artist with shears and brushes, worked his magic on her hair and makeup. He had been styling her for the past year, ever since Sterling Enterprises had become successful enough for her to afford such exquisite luxuries. "You seem different today, Natasha," Marcus observed, his fingers deftly weaving through her hair, his gaze meeting hers in the mirror. "More focused, like you're preparing for something incredibly important, something momentous." "You could say that," Natasha replied, a subtle smile playing on her lips. "Tonight is going to be a very special evening indeed." "Hot date?" Marcus teased gently, always perceptive. Natasha laughed, a soft, genuine sound. "Not exactly. More like a business meeting disguised as a social event, a very, very important business meeting." Marcus raised an eyebrow, a silent acknowledgement of her cryptic words, but didn't push for details. He had learned over the years that his wealthy clients often spoke in carefully coded language about their complex affairs. While Marcus worked, Natasha's phone buzzed discreetly with messages from Patricia. The final details for tonight were falling meticulously into place, each component locking into position like a perfectly engineered machine. The car would pick her up at precisely 7:00 p.m. Her discreet security team, an invisible perimeter of protection, would be stationed strategically around the gala venue. The comprehensive financial reports she had requested were ready for her final review, the numbers a damning indictment of Benjamin's hubris. Most importantly, Patricia had confirmed that Thomas Williams and several other Sterling-affiliated CEOs, her carefully chosen witnesses, would indeed be present at the gala. When the moment came for her meticulously planned revelation, she would have an abundance of credible witnesses who could verify her claims about Sterling Enterprises, about Benjamin's unwitting dependence. "All done," Marcus announced, stepping back to admire his artistry, his face beaming with satisfaction. "You look absolutely gorgeous, Natasha." Natasha smiled at her reflection. He was right. She did look good. Confident, poised, successful, and utterly ready for whatever the evening might bring. Benjamin was expecting to see a broken woman, grateful for his condescending invitation, perhaps even eager for his fleeting attention. Instead, he was going to face someone he no longer recognized, someone who had transcended his petty judgments and risen from the ashes he had left her in. Back at her apartment, Natasha meticulously laid out everything for the evening. The midnight blue gown hung on her closet door, not just a dress, but a battle uniform. The exquisite jewelry, diamonds and sapphires, sparkled with a cold fire in its velvet case. The designer shoes waited by the door, ready to carry her into the fray, into the war she was about to declare. She poured herself another glass of wine, savoring the ritual, and sat down to review the financial reports Patricia had prepared, the numbers of final confirmation of her power. The figures were even more damaging, more utterly complete than she had remembered. The Richardson Group's dependence on Sterling-controlled contracts was absolute, total. If she decided to pull those contracts and act she fully intended, Benjamin's business would not just falter, it would collapse, utterly and irrevocably within 6 short months. The thought gave her a dark, profound satisfaction, not out of malice, but out of a fierce sense of justice finally being served. For 3 long years she had built her empire, brick by painful brick, while Benjamin, in his towering arrogance, had reveled in his superficial success, never knowing, never even suspecting, that his entire prosperity depended on the woman he had so cruelly discarded. Tonight, that blissful ignorance would finally, spectacularly end. Her phone rang. "Hello, Mother." "Natasha, honey, how are you feeling about tonight?" Eleanor Richardson, her mother, a woman of quiet strength, spoke with a tender concern. Eleanor, who had wisely kept Benjamin's name after the divorce primarily to avoid the hassle of changing it back, was the only person who knew the full, astonishing truth about her daughter's transformation. She had watched Natasha rebuild her life from nothing, had been her unwavering pillar of support during the darkest, most agonizing days. "I'm ready, Mama," Natasha said, her voice imbued with an unshakable resolve. "More than ready. Are you sure about this, baby? You could just continue living your successful life without confronting Benjamin. Why put yourself through this public display, this potential heartache?" Natasha considered the question, the unspoken worries in her mother's voice. "It's not about the money, Mama," she said softly. "I have more than enough of that, far more than I ever dreamed." A pause, as she searched for the right words. "It's not even about revenge. Not truly. Not anymore. At least, not in the petty sense." She took a deep breath. "It's about justice. Benjamin tried to destroy my spirit, to convince me and everyone else that I was utterly worthless without him. He took everything from me, stripped me bare, and left me with nothing but gnawing doubt and profound pain. Tonight," she continued, her voice gaining strength, "tonight is about proving to myself as much as to him that I am stronger, more capable, and infinitely more powerful than he ever imagined. It's about closing a chapter of my life that has been left open, bleeding, for far too long. Because he needs to know, Mama," she concluded, her voice firm, unwavering. "He needs to understand, unequivocally, what he threw away. And he needs to face the consequences of his choices, not in secret, but in the glaring light of public scrutiny. Just remember, baby," Eleanor said gently, her voice thick with love, "you've already won. You don't need his validation, and you certainly don't need his apology. You've built something truly amazing, something extraordinary, and you did it all without him." "I know, Mama," Natasha replied, "but I need to do this, for me." After hanging up, Natasha walked to her safe, a discreet, fortified box hidden behind a painting. She pulled out a small, velvet-covered box. Inside lay her original wedding ring, a simple, unassuming gold band Benjamin had given her when they were young, hopeful, and struggling to build their first business together. She had kept it not out of sentimentality, but as a tangible reminder of the naive, trusting woman she used to be, a symbol of the past she now needed to shed. Tonight, she would finally, definitively let go of that woman forever. At 6:30 p.m., she began getting dressed, each piece of her carefully chosen outfit becoming a piece of armor, shielding her from the vulnerability she had felt the last time she had stood before Benjamin. The midnight blue gown, the perfectly matched shoes, the exquisite jewelry, they all converged to transform her into someone new, someone powerful, someone utterly unassailable. At precisely 7:00 p.m., a discreet knock echoed on her door. "Mrs. Richardson, your car is ready." Natasha took one last, lingering look at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was confident, successful, radiant, and ready for anything. She bore little resemblance to the broken woman who had left the courthouse 3 years ago with nothing but a suitcase and a shattered heart. "Let's go," she said, her voice clear and resonant, and walked out to face her past, her future, and her destiny. The grand ballroom of the Henderson Hotel was a vision of opulent luxury and understated elegance. Crystal chandeliers, sparkling like captured galaxies, cast a warm, inviting light over the swirling crowd of beautifully dressed guests. Servers circulated with practiced grace, offering flutes of effervescent champagne and trays piled high with gourmet appetizers. The annual charity gala was always one of the undisputed social events of the season, attracting the city's most influential business leaders, prominent philanthropists, and glittering socialites. Natasha arrived fashionably late, precisely as she had meticulously planned. Her driver, a picture of discreet professionalism, opened the door of the sleek black town car, and she stepped out onto the plush red carpet that led to the hotel entrance. She could feel the subtle shift in the air, the collective gaze of photographers and other arriving guests turning to her as she walked confidently, with an almost regal bearing, toward the grand ballroom doors. She wasn't seeking attention, but she wasn't avoiding it either. She simply existed in her own sphere of self-possession. Inside, the party was already in full, vibrant swing. The air hummed with hushed conversations and polite laughter. She recognized many faces from the business pages of newspapers and magazines: powerful CEOs, astute investors, influential politicians, and prominent socialites, all mingling in their finest attire, a glittering tableau of power and privilege. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server, its cool effervescence a pleasant counterpoint to the quiet thrum of anticipation within her, and began to move through the crowd, looking for familiar faces. Natasha Richardson! She turned to see Thomas Williams approaching, a look of genuine surprise and admiration on his face, quickly morphing into a warm smile. "Thomas, how lovely to see you here," she replied, her voice smooth and cordial. "I had no idea you'd be attending tonight. You look absolutely stunning." "Thank you," Natasha responded graciously. "I wouldn't miss it. It's for such a good cause, after all." As they chatted idly about the event, Natasha subtly scanned the crowd, noting the presence of other Sterling-affiliated executives. Robert Chin, from the investment firm where she had gotten her start, was deep in animated conversation with a group of high-profile bankers. Margaret Foster, the dynamic CEO of one of Sterling's successful retail chains, was laughing with the mayor's wife near the silent auction display. Perfect. When the time came, she would have an abundance of credible witnesses who could verify her claims, lending an undeniable weight to her words. Natasha. The voice behind her was one she hadn't heard in 3 long years, but its familiar timbre still sent a faint, chilling ripple down her spine. It was a voice she had once loved, now associated with profound pain. She turned slowly, deliberately, to face Benjamin Richardson. He looked older than she remembered, the intervening years etching their mark. His once dark hair was now streaked with distinguished gray at the temples, and there were subtle lines around his eyes that hadn't been there during their marriage, lines that hinted at unseen stresses. He was still undeniably handsome in his expensive, impeccably tailored tuxedo, but there was something harder about his face now, something cold, calculating, and ultimately less engaging. Standing possessively beside him was Brittany, now Mrs. Benjamin Richardson. She was as beautiful as ever, perhaps even more so, her blonde hair perfectly styled, cascading like spun gold, and her slim figure enhanced by a stunning designer gown that probably cost more than most people made in a month. She looked at Natasha with poorly concealed disdain, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips, a clear message of her perceived superiority. "Benjamin," Natasha said calmly, her voice level, betraying nothing of the maelstrom of emotions swirling within her. "Thank you for the invitation." "I wasn't sure you'd come," he replied, his eyes sweeping over her appearance, a flicker of surprise evident in their depths. She clearly looked better, far more composed and successful than he had expected. His condescending narrative about her continued struggle was already taking a hit. "You look well." "Thank you," Natasha replied, a subtle emphasis on the last word. "Life has been good to me." Brittany stepped closer to Benjamin's side, her hand sliding possessively through his arm, her grip tight. "Natasha, isn't it? I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Brittany Richardson." The emphasis on the last name was deliberate, petty, and undeniably aimed to wound. Natasha smiled graciously, her composure unshakable. "Congratulations on your marriage. I hope you're very happy together." The words were outwardly polite, but carried a subtle, unspoken weight. "Oh, we are," Brittany gushed, preening, displaying her enormous diamond wedding ring with an ostentatious flourish. "Benjamin has given me everything I ever dreamed of. We just got back from Paris, a belated honeymoon trip. We stayed in the most beautiful suite at the Four Seasons." Natasha nodded politely, a ghost of a knowing smile touching her lips. She already knew about the trip. She owned the very hotel chain that had provided their luxurious accommodations, though they were, of course, entirely oblivious to that fact. "That sounds wonderful," she said, her voice genuinely pleasant. "I've always loved Paris." "Have you been recently?" Benjamin asked, his tone suddenly sharp, a subtle aggression cutting through the pleasantries. "I imagine international travel isn't exactly in your budget these days, Natasha. The comment was a deliberate sting, designed to remind her of her supposedly reduced circumstances, to bring her back down to the level he envisioned for her. Natasha felt the old, familiar pain try to surface, the ghost of past hurts, but she swiftly pushed it down. She had moved far beyond the reach of Benjamin's casual cruelties, building an emotional fortress around herself. "I managed to get around," she said lightly, a subtle shimmer of defiance in her eyes. "Well, it's good to see you're managing," Brittany chimed in with false sweetness, a saccharine tone that barely masked her condescension. "It must be difficult starting over at your age, but I'm sure you'll find your way eventually." To Brittany, Natasha was a cautionary tale, a discarded first wife, a stark reminder of what could happen if a woman didn't hold on to her man tightly enough, if she wasn't young and beautiful enough. "Actually," Natasha said, her voice clear and resonant, "I found starting over to be quite liberating. Sometimes losing everything gives you the profound freedom to become something far better, far more powerful than you ever imagined possible." Benjamin's eyes narrowed slightly. Something in her tone, a quiet strength he hadn't anticipated, seemed to puzzle him, to unsettle his carefully constructed narrative. "What exactly are you doing these days, Natasha? For work, I mean," he pressed, a thinly veiled attempt to pry into her supposed struggles. "Consulting," she replied vaguely, offering just enough to satisfy but nothing substantial. "Business development, investment advice, that sort of thing." "Consulting?" Brittany repeated with a small, dismissive laugh, sharing a conspiratorial glance with Benjamin. "Oh, nice. That must be interesting work. It has its rewards, I'm sure," Benjamin said, though his tone was laced with doubt. "Though I imagine the client base is somewhat limited, the business world can be very exclusive, especially for people without the right connections, the right pedigree." Again, the dig was deliberate, a subtle reminder that their divorce had cut her off from the professional network they had meticulously built together. In his arrogant mind, she was now an outsider, dependent on whatever scraps of work she could find among the lower tiers of the business world, far from the glittering heights he now occupied. "You'd be surprised," Natasha said, her voice calm and steady. "I've found that talent and results matter far more than connections, Benjamin. Good work truly speaks for itself, doesn't it?" "Does it?" Benjamin's smile was cold, cynical. "Well, I hope that philosophy works out for you. Though, I have to say, the business world has become increasingly competitive since you left the field. It takes a certain kind of person to succeed at the highest levels." The implication was painfully clear. She wasn't that kind of person. She never had been, and she never would be. Natasha felt a familiar surge of old rage building in her chest, a phantom echo of past hurts, but she kept her expression pleasant and calm, her control absolute. "You're absolutely right, Benjamin. It does take a certain kind of person, the kind who doesn't give up when things get difficult, the kind who learns from failure and comes back stronger, more determined." "Oh, how inspiring," Brittany said with another dismissive laugh, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You should write self-help books, Natasha." Before Natasha could respond, the ballroom lights dimmed and a clear, amplified voice came over the sound system, requesting everyone to take their seats for dinner. As the crowd began moving toward the dining area, a palpable sense of anticipation filling the air, Benjamin leaned closer to Natasha, his voice dropping to a low, intimate whisper, meant only for her ears. "I hope you enjoy the evening, Natasha," he said, a cruel glint in his eyes. "I thought it might be educational for you to see how the other half lives." With that final, condescending jab, he and Brittany turned and walked away, leaving Natasha standing alone amidst the flowing tide of guests. But instead of feeling hurt or diminished or humiliated by the encounter, Natasha felt an electrifying surge of energy. Everything was proceeding exactly as she had meticulously hoped. Benjamin and Brittany, in just a few minutes of casual conversation, had revealed themselves completely. Their breathtaking arrogance, their casual cruelty, their absolute, unwavering certainty of their own superiority. It was all on full, unadulterated display. They had, unwittingly, walked straight into her trap. They had no idea what was coming for them. Dinner was an elaborate affair, a testament to culinary artistry, featuring multiple courses and meticulously paired wines. Natasha found herself seated at a table with several prominent business leaders she recognized, including the formidable Margaret Foster and two other CEOs whose successful companies were now, unbeknownst to them, part of the expansive Sterling portfolio. Benjamin and Brittany, predictably, were seated at the opulent head table, prominently positioned where they could be seen, admired, and envied by everyone in the room. As the evening progressed, Natasha observed them with the detached precision of a scientist studying a specimen. Benjamin was undeniably in his element, holding court with important guests, regaling them with anecdotes, and making everyone laugh with his practiced charm. He had always possessed an undeniable charisma in social situations, an uncanny ability to make people feel like they were the most important person in the room, even if it was a fleeting, performative illusion. Brittany basked openly in his reflected glory, hanging on his every word, her laughter a little too loud, her gestures a little too dramatic, making sure everyone noticed her glittering, expensive jewelry and her exquisite designer gown. She was playing the part of the perfect trophy wife, beautiful, seemingly devoted, and entirely superficial. During the second course, a delectable roasted pheasant, Benjamin rose from his seat, a confident swagger in his step, and approached the microphone at the front of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment." The room, a sea of hushed anticipation, quieted almost immediately as all eyes turned to him. He looked confident, at ease, clearly comfortable being the absolute center of attention, a role he relished. "First is," he began, his voice resonating through the ballroom, polished and perfectly modulated, "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight and for your incredibly generous support of the Children's Education Foundation. Your donations, truly, will make a real, tangible difference in the lives of deserving young people." Polite, dutiful applause rippled through the room. "I also want to take a moment to acknowledge someone special who's here with us tonight," Benjamin continued, his eyes with a calculated deliberateness, finding Natasha in the crowded room. "My ex-wife, Natasha Richardson, has joined us this evening. I thought it would be nice for her to see how successful our little business has become since our divorce, how much we've truly come along." The room fell into an unnerving silence. This was clearly unexpected, profoundly inappropriate, and deeply uncomfortable. But no one seemed to know how to react, how to respond to such a blatant breach of decorum. Natasha felt every eye in the room turn to her, 1,000 silent stares, and she could sense the palpable discomfort radiating from the other guests. "You see," Benjamin went on, savoring the moment, his voice laced with an almost triumphant disdain, "when Natasha and I divorced 3 years ago, she was convinced that she was absolutely essential to our company's success. She thought that without her creative input, without her, the Richardson Group would struggle, perhaps even fail. Well," he paused for dramatic effect, a smirk playing on his lips, "I'm happy to report that the Richardson Group has actually thrived beyond all expectation since her departure. We've grown by 200%, expanded into exciting new markets, and just this year, we were named Marketing Firm of the Year by Business Excellence magazine." More uncomfortable silence, deeper this time. Even Brittany, sitting at the head table, looked momentarily uncertain, a flicker of apprehension crossing her face as she wondered where this public spectacle was truly heading. "So, Natasha," Benjamin said, raising his wine glass in a mocking toast in her direction, "I want to thank you. Your departure, your exit from my life, actually forced us to reach new, unprecedented heights. Sometimes," he concluded, his voice dripping with venom, "losing dead weight is exactly what a business needs to soar." The insult, delivered in public, in front of the most influential people in the city, was devastating in its cruelty. Several guests looked genuinely appalled by Benjamin's blatant vindictiveness, their faces a mixture of shock and disgust. But others, Natasha noticed, seemed perversely entertained by the unfolding drama, the public spectacle of a bitter, divorced couple. Natasha could feel their stares, could almost hear their whispered conversations later that night about the scandalous scene. But instead of feeling humiliated, instead of crumbling under the weight of his public assault, Natasha felt a profound, chilling calm settle over her. Benjamin had just made a fatal mistake. He had attacked her publicly in front of countless witnesses and brazenly claimed credit for a success that actually belonged, in large part, to her. He had, with his own words, given her the perfect, unassailable opening for what was to come. She stood slowly, her movements graceful, controlled, every inch a woman of immense power. The room watched, mesmerized, as she picked up her own wine glass, its crystal clinking softly, and smiled at Benjamin, a smile that held no warmth, only an icy, steely resolve. "Thank you, Benjamin," she said, her voice carrying clearly, resonating with a quiet authority through the suddenly silent ballroom. "That's very kind of you to say. I'm so glad Richardson Group has done well. Success suits you." She paused, letting the moment build, allowing the tension to hang heavy in the air. "I'm especially glad to hear that you've grown by 200%. That's quite impressive for a company that, if I understand correctly, gets significant revenue from clients like Henderson Industries." From his nearby table, Thomas Williams, ever the professional, nodded almost imperceptibly, his eyes alight with a growing understanding. "That's correct," he confirmed, his voice clear. "Henderson Industries has been a major client of Richardson Group for the past 2 years. And Sterling Manufacturing," added Robert Chin, rising slightly from his seat, drawn into the unfolding drama. "They've done excellent work for us as well, for quite some time now." "Sterling Real Estate Development, too," called out Margaret Foster, her voice echoing the growing excitement in the room. "Richardson Group has handled all our major campaigns for the past 2 years." Natasha smiled, a predatory gleam in her eyes. As more Sterling-affiliated executives, each recognizing their cue, confirmed their business relationships with the Richardson Group. She could see confusion beginning to cloud Benjamin's face, a dawning realization as he slowly understood that all of his biggest clients, the very bedrock of his success, seemed to know this woman he had just publicly humiliated. His confident facade was starting to crack. "It's interesting," Natasha continued, still holding her wine glass, her voice calm, almost conversational, yet piercing every corner of the room. "How interconnected the business world can be. You never truly know who might be behind the companies you work with. Sometimes the most successful people are the ones you never see coming." "What are you getting at, Natasha?" Benjamin asked, his voice now noticeably weaker, his once unshakable confidence wavering, a tremor of fear entering his tone. "Oh, nothing specific," Natasha replied innocently, her eyes sparkling with a dangerous amusement. "I'm just observing how small the business world really is, how the same names keep appearing in different contexts, how success can, quite unexpectedly, be built on relationships you don't even realize you have, or perhaps actively dismiss." Brittany, utterly bewildered, was looking back and forth between them, her face a mask of confusion, clearly sensing that something monumental was unfolding, but completely unable to grasp its implications. "I mean," Natasha went on, her gaze sweeping across the stunned audience, "take Sterling Enterprises, for example, a very successful company. From what I understand, owns businesses across multiple industries, a true powerhouse, yet nobody really knows who runs it. Very mysterious, wouldn't you say?" She could see Benjamin's face changing, the blood draining from it, as the name Sterling began to register, to resonate with an unnerving familiarity. He was starting to make connections, starting to realize that he had heard that name far more often, in far too many crucial contexts than could possibly be coincidental. "The interesting thing about anonymous ownership," Natasha said, her voice maintaining its conversational cadence, but carrying to every corner of the now deathly silent room, "is that it allows you to observe how people truly behave when they think no one important is watching. You get to see their true character, their unguarded nature, their deepest flaws." Benjamin slowly, deliberately, set down his microphone, his hands trembling visibly. His face had gone pale, a sickly gray, and Natasha could see the frantic wheels turning in his mind, the horrifying realization dawning as he began, piece by agonizing piece, to put the puzzle together. But of course, she concluded, raising her wine glass high, a triumphant gesture. Sometimes it's far more fun to step out of the shadows and let people know exactly who they've been dealing with all along. The room was dead silent, every single guest hanging on her words, sensing that they were witnessing something truly extraordinary, a corporate coup unfolding before their very eyes, but not yet fully understanding its devastating magnitude. Benjamin's voice came out as barely more than a ragged whisper, amplified eerily through the sound system. "What are you saying?" Natasha's smile was radiant, utterly beautiful and terribly menacing. "I'm saying, Benjamin, that you were absolutely right about one thing. Your departure from my life did, indeed, allow me to reach new heights. Heights you can't even begin to imagine." Benjamin remained frozen at the microphone, his face growing paler by the second as the full implications of Natasha's words, the profound, inescapable truth, began to sink in. The entire ballroom was silent, a vast, hushed space. Guests exchanged confused, then shocked glances as they tried desperately to comprehend the unprecedented confrontation unfolding between the divorced couple. "Sterling Enterprises?" Benjamin repeated slowly, his voice barely audible even through the sound system, a sound of profound disbelief. "You're saying you know about Sterling Enterprises?" "Know about it?" Natasha laughed, a sound that was both musical and menacing, a prelude to a storm. "Benjamin, I think you're still not quite understanding the situation." She began walking slowly toward the head table, her heels clicking with deliberate, measured grace against the polished marble floor of the hushed ballroom. Every step was precise, controlled, like a predator approaching wounded prey. "Let me help clarify things for you," she said as she moved, her voice growing stronger with each step. "Thomas, would you mind telling everyone what percentage of Henderson Industries' marketing budget goes to Richardson Group?" Thomas Williams, looking utterly fascinated by the unfolding drama, consulted his phone with a quick, efficient flick of his wrist. "Approximately 60% of our annual marketing budget, Natasha. Richardson Group handles our luxury hotel chains, our restaurant division, and our real estate development projects." "And Robert," Natasha prompted, turning slightly to Robert Chin, "what about your investment firm?" Robert Chin nodded, his expression one of profound awe. "Richardson Group manages our client communications and brand development. They've been with us for 18 months now, and their contracts are substantial." "Margaret," Natasha continued, addressing Margaret Foster, "Sterling Real Estate Development has used Richardson Group for all our major campaigns for the past 2 years," Margaret confirmed, her voice clear and strong. "They handle everything from our residential projects to our commercial developments." Natasha reached the head table and stood directly across from Benjamin, who was now gripping the microphone stand for support, his knuckles white, his posture slumped. "Are you starting to see the pattern, Benjamin?" I don't understand what you're implying," he stammered, but his voice, though he tried to control it, betrayed his growing, suffocating fear. "Henderson Industries, Sterling Manufacturing, Sterling Real Estate Development, Sterling Investment Management," Natasha recited, her voice calm, precise, an executioner listing charges. "All major clients of Richardson Group, all very successful companies, all with one very interesting thing in common." She paused, letting the unbearable tension build as Benjamin's breathing became rapid and shallow, his eyes wide with horror. "They're all owned by the same parent company, Sterling Enterprises." The gasps from the audience were audible, a collective intake of breath. Several guests had pulled out their phones and were furiously looking up information about Sterling Enterprises, their faces showing outright shock as they discovered the immense scope and breadth of the company's holdings. Brittany, who had been silent throughout the exchange, her face frozen in bewilderment, finally found her voice, shrill with panic. "That's impossible. Richardson Group has dozens of major clients. You can't possibly be suggesting that some mysterious company." "Not mysterious at all," Natasha said calmly, cutting her off, her gaze unyielding. "Just private. Sterling Enterprises owns 47 companies across 12 industries. Those companies employ over 15,000 people and generate annual revenues of approximately $230 million. The numbers hit the room like physical blows, a thunderclap of undeniable power. Several guests were now openly staring at Natasha with a newfound recognition, an awed respect, as they processed the incredible revelation. The woman they had watched Benjamin publicly humiliate just moments earlier was, apparently, one of the most successful, most powerful business owners in the entire city. That's not possible, Benjamin whispered, his voice a broken croak. You're lying. After the divorce, you had nothing. I know, because I took everything. The house, the cars, the business, everything was mine. You took everything that was legally yours, Benjamin, Natasha agreed, her voice retaining its clear, steady tone, which, thanks to my naive trust in you, was indeed everything we had painstakingly built together. You left me with $27 and a single suitcase full of clothes. A broken woman. Her voice carried clearly through the room, and several guests looked appalled at this stark revelation of Benjamin's ruthlessness during their divorce. But you made one critical error, Benjamin, Natasha continued, leaning slightly closer, her voice now filled with a quiet, undeniable power. You assumed that what we built together was the absolute limit of what I was capable of building. You thought that without you, I would crumble, disappear, become irrelevant. You never, not once, considered that losing everything might actually free me to become something much more powerful, much more formidable than I had ever been before. Benjamin was shaking his head, a desperate, futile gesture of denial. Even if what you're saying is true, even if you somehow managed to build some kind of business empire, Richardson Group doesn't depend on any single client. We're diversified. We have contracts with dozens of companies. 43%. Natasha said simply, cutting through his frantic rationalizations. What? He mumbled, utterly lost. 43% of Richardson Group's revenue comes directly from companies owned by Sterling Enterprises, she clarified, her words a hammer blow. Would you like me to break that down for you? She pulled out her phone, the screen a glowing testament to his undoing, and began reading from the meticulous financial reports Patricia had prepared. Henderson Industries, $2.8 million annually. Sterling Manufacturing, $1.6 million. Sterling Real Estate Development, $2.2 million. Sterling Investment Management, $1 million. Sterling Technology Solutions, $800,000. Sterling Retail Group, $1.3 million. She paused, her gaze unwavering. Should I continue? With each number, each precise figure, Benjamin seemed to shrink further into himself, his entire being collapsing under the weight of the truth. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving it ashen, and he was now openly perspiring despite the air conditioning in the ballroom. That's, he started, then stopped, apparently unable to form a coherent thought, his mind reeling. Nearly $4 million annually, Natasha finished for him, her voice devoid of pity. Without those contracts, Benjamin, Richardson Group would be operating at a significant, unsustainable loss. Your company, the one you're so proud of, would be bankrupt within 6 short months. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. Many of the guests were business leaders themselves, and they understood immediately, with chilling clarity, what this meant. Benjamin Richardson, who had just publicly humiliated his ex-wife, had unknowingly and ironically built his entire success, his reputation, his lavish lifestyle, on her money, on her unacknowledged empire. "This is insane!" Brittany shrieked, her voice shrill with raw panic, finally finding her voice. "You're making this up! There's no way you could own all those companies. We would have known. Benjamin would have known." "Would he?" Natasha asked, turning her attention to the younger woman, her gaze piercing. "Tell me, Brittany, how much attention did Benjamin pay to the fine print of his contracts? Did he meticulously research the ownership structure of his clients? Or did he simply rely on his charm and your superficial understanding of business? Or was he too busy enjoying the lavish lifestyle those contracts provided to ask inconvenient questions about where the money was really coming from? Brittany looked desperately to Benjamin for support, but he was staring at Natasha as if seeing a ghost, a terrifying apparition of his past come to haunt his present. The confident, successful businessman who had stood at the microphone minutes earlier was gone, replaced by a man utterly broken, clearly struggling to process the devastating magnitude of what he was learning. "You see," Natasha continued, addressing the silent, captivated room, "the beautiful thing about anonymous ownership is that it lets you see how people truly behave when they think no one important is watching, when they believe there are no consequences. For 2 years, I've been observing how you treat the people you think are beneath you, how you operate when you believe you're truly untouchable. I've watched you take credit for work that was actually funded by my companies. I've seen how you talk about me to your friends and business associates, how you've rewritten history to suit your narrative." She moved closer to Benjamin, her voice dropping to a conversational level that the microphone still picked up with eerie clarity. "I've seen who you really are, Benjamin, and I've been very, very disappointed." The host of the gala, Victoria Henderson, approached the microphone area with obvious nervousness. As the owner of Henderson Industries and the primary organizer of the prestigious charity event, she felt a profound responsibility for the rapidly escalating tension in the ballroom. "Perhaps we should take a short break," she suggested diplomatically, her voice strained. "Allow everyone to process what we've heard." "Actually," Natasha said, turning to face the expectant crowd, her voice strong and clear, "I think this is the perfect time to address something even more important. You see, everyone here tonight believes they were invited by Benjamin and Brittany Richardson, but that's not entirely accurate." She gestured toward Victoria Henderson. "Victoria, would you mind telling everyone who actually funds this annual charity gala?" Victoria looked incredibly uncomfortable, but a woman of integrity, she answered honestly. "The primary sponsor has always been an anonymous donor who covers most of the event costs and matches all donations dollar for dollar. We've never met this donor personally. All arrangements are made through representatives." "And how long has this arrangement been in place, Victoria?" Natasha pressed gently. 3 years now. The anonymous donor approached us shortly after the previous main sponsor withdrew their support." Natasha nodded, a grim satisfaction settling over her. "Benjamin, do you remember when you so eagerly volunteered to host this gala 3 years ago? When you told everyone you were magnanimously taking over as the primary sponsor, basking in the praise?" Benjamin's face was now a sickly gray color, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrible understanding. You can't be the anonymous donor who's been funding this event for 3 years, Benjamin. The person whose money has allowed you to take credit for charitable giving while actually contributing very little of your own funds." Natasha's smile was razor sharp, a blade of truth cutting through his facade. "Yes, Benjamin, that was me. All me." The gasps from the audience were louder this time, a collective roar of shock and outrage. Several guests were now openly staring at Benjamin with undisguised disgust as they realized he had been shamelessly taking credit for someone else's immense generosity, building his reputation on a foundation of lies. "But it gets better," Natasha continued, her voice resonating with an almost theatrical flair. "Victoria, would you please tell everyone how much the anonymous donor has contributed to the Children's Education Foundation over the past 3 years?" Victoria, now visibly shaken, consulted her records on her phone, her fingers trembling slightly. "The anonymous donor has contributed over $2 million in direct funding, plus matching donations," she reported, her voice hushed. "It's been the largest source of funding in the foundation's entire history." $2 million, Natasha repeated, letting the staggering number sink in, its weight crushing Benjamin's pretense. "Benjamin, in those same 3 years, how much have you and Brittany personally contributed to the foundation?" Benjamin opened his mouth, but no sound came out, only a dry, rasping gasp. Brittany stepped forward, her voice defensive, desperate. "We've contributed our time and effort organizing these events. That's worth something." Of course it is, Brittany, Natasha agreed pleasantly, her voice still calm, almost sweet, though I should mention that the event planning for these galas, the catering, the venue selection, the entire logistical nightmare, has actually been handled by Sterling Event Management, another subsidiary of Sterling Enterprises. So technically, you've been taking credit for organizing events that were actually meticulously planned and flawlessly executed by my employees, funded by my company. The room erupted in a cacophony of murmurs, gasps, and whispers as guests began to fully grasp the astonishing scope of what they were witnessing. Benjamin Richardson, the man who had built his reputation on both his business success and his ostentatious charitable work, had apparently been living off the achievements, the generosity, and the brilliance of the woman he had publicly scorned and so carelessly discarded. "This is impossible," Benjamin said desperately, his voice cracking with the strain of his crumbling world. "Even if everything you're saying is true, how could you have kept it secret? How could I not have known?" "Because you never bothered to look, Benjamin," Natasha replied simply, her voice now cold and precise, like a surgeon's scalpel. "You were so utterly convinced of your own superiority, so absolutely certain that I was irrelevant to your success, that you never questioned where your good fortune was truly coming from. You saw only what you wanted to see, what fit your inflated ego. You ignored the subtle signs, the obvious connections, because they didn't align with your comfortable narrative." She turned to address the entire room, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to apologize for this public display. I know this isn't what you expected when you came here tonight to support a worthy cause, but sometimes the truth has a way of demanding to be heard, demanding its moment in the spotlight." Margaret Foster, a formidable woman in her own right, stood up at her table, her voice ringing out clearly. "Are you really saying that you've been secretly supporting Benjamin's business for 3 years, providing his livelihood, while he's been publicly dismissing you as dead weight?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Natasha affirmed, her voice unyielding. "I've been paying for his lavish lifestyle, funding his carefully constructed reputation, and enabling his entire perceived success, all while he told anyone who would listen that I was utterly worthless without him." Thomas Williams shook his head in absolute amazement, a slow, disbelieving laugh escaping his lips. That's incredible. You've been playing a 3-year game, Natasha, while he didn't even know there was a board. But why?" asked Robert Chin, his voice laced with genuine curiosity. "Why would you support someone who treated you so badly, who caused you so much pain?" Natasha considered the question, her gaze thoughtful. "At first, it wasn't intentional. When I started acquiring companies, I focused purely on businesses with good fundamentals and strong growth potential. It was only after I had purchased several of Benjamin's major clients that I slowly, shockingly, realized the connection, the intricate web of dependence. And once I fully understood what was happening, the delicious irony of it all, I decided to see how far it would go. I decided to conduct an experiment." She looked directly at Benjamin, who was still standing, frozen, at the microphone, a statue of utter defeat. "I wanted to see if success, if unchecked prosperity, would humble you, Benjamin. I hoped that maybe, given enough time and material comfort, you might develop some perspective about what you had done to me, the profound damage you had inflicted. I thought you might eventually realize that your good fortune was too convenient, too perfectly timed, to be entirely your own doing." "And did it?" someone called out from the audience, unable to contain their curiosity. Natasha's laugh was bitter, a harsh, humorless sound. Quite the opposite, I'm afraid. The more successful the Richardson Group became, the more credit Benjamin took. The more money flowed in, the more utterly convinced he became of his own singular genius, his unparalleled brilliance. And the more secure he felt in his position, the crueler he became in his references to me, the more he delighted in my perceived downfall. She gestured toward the microphone, where Benjamin still stood, a broken man. Tonight, Benjamin was supposed to be the culmination of that cruelty. He invited me here specifically to humiliate me, to parade his triumph, and to show me unequivocally how much better his life was without my dead weight. He wanted to rub my face in his success and make absolutely sure I understood my insignificant place in his world. Benjamin finally found his voice, though it came out as a desperate croak, devoid of its former confidence. Natasha, if what you're saying is true, then what, Benjamin? Natasha interrupted, her voice sharp, cutting through his pathetic stammer. Then you're sorry? Then you want to make amends? Then you realize you made a mistake. A terrible, unforgivable error. She stepped closer to him, her voice dropping to a whisper, a chilling intimacy that the microphone still picked up, broadcasting it to the silent, rapt audience. It's far too late for apologies, Benjamin. You had 3 long years to show me who you really were, and you showed me someone I don't recognize. Someone cruel, petty, and arrogant. Someone who takes credit for other people's work, for other people's generosity, while treating them like absolute garbage. The room was completely silent, a vacuum of sound, except for the low hum of the air conditioning and the distant, muffled sounds of the city outside. So here's what's going to happen, Natasha said, her voice returning to normal volume, clear and unyielding, a pronouncement. Effective Monday morning, Sterling Enterprises will be terminating all contracts with Richardson Group. All of them. She paused, letting the words hang in the air, allowing their full, devastating weight to settle. Henderson Industries, Sterling Manufacturing, Sterling Real Estate Development, every single subsidiary of Sterling Enterprises will be finding new marketing partners. Starting Monday, you will have nothing. Benjamin's legs seemed to give out beneath him, and he had to grab the podium, clinging to it desperately to keep from falling, his face a mask of utter despair. You can't. That would destroy everything we've built. Everything you've built? Natasha's voice was sharp with a righteous anger, a final scorching condemnation. You built nothing, Benjamin. You were a middleman, a charming face taking credit for my success, for my creative genius, for my strategic vision. The only thing you ever truly built was your own monumental ego, a house of cards that was destined to collapse. She turned to face the audience one final time, her gaze commanding, powerful. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your patience during this unexpected revelation. I hope you'll continue to support the Children's Education Foundation, which does genuinely important work regardless of its sponsors. And I hope you'll remember that sometimes the most powerful people in the room are the ones you never see coming, the ones who operate quietly, effectively from the shadows. With that, she turned and walked away from the head table, her back straight, her head held high, leaving Benjamin collapsed against the podium, a defeated man, and Brittany staring after her in utter shock, her face a picture of dawning horror. The game was over, and Natasha, with an elegant, devastating precision, had won. 3 months after the gala, Natasha sat in her expansive, sun-drenched office, reading the morning business news on her sleek tablet. The lead story in the business journal, emblazoned across the digital page, was about the inevitable bankruptcy filing of the Richardson Group. The article detailed, with cold corporate precision, how the once prominent marketing firm had lost several major clients simultaneously and had been utterly unable to recover financially. Benjamin's quotes in the article were pathetic, filled with a transparent victimhood. He claimed the business failures were due to unforeseeable market changes and unfortunate contract cancellations beyond our control. There was predictably no mention of his ex-wife, no hint of the dramatic public revelation at the charity gala, though anyone in the city's business community who had been there would understand with chilling clarity exactly what had happened. Patricia knocked discreetly on the door and entered with the morning mail, a small, efficient stack of documents. The final reports from all the terminated Richardson contracts are on your desk, ma'am, she said, her voice a model of professional efficiency. Every subsidiary has successfully transitioned to new marketing partners. Several of them are reporting better results, more innovative campaigns than they ever achieved with Richardson Group. Excellent, Natasha replied, setting down her tablet, a sense of deep, abiding satisfaction settling over her. What about the charity foundation? Donations are actually up from last year, Patricia reported, a hint of surprise in her voice. It seems the publicity from the gala, despite the initial drama and scandal, actually increased awareness of their important work. Victoria Henderson asked me to pass along her sincerest thanks for your continued invaluable support. Good, Natasha murmured. What else? You have 3 new acquisition proposals to review, a conference call with the Sterling Technology Board at 2:00 p.m., and the final fitting for your dress for tomorrow night's Medical Research Foundation Gala. Natasha smiled, a genuine warm smile this time. The irony isn't lost on me, Patricia, that I'm attending more charity events now than I ever did when I was married to Benjamin, when I was supposedly the philanthropic partner. You also have several interview requests from major business magazines, Patricia continued. Forbes in particular wants to do a cover story on Sterling Enterprises, now that you've decided to be more public about your ownership, about your remarkable story. I think it's time, Natasha said, her gaze drifting to the panoramic view outside her window. The anonymous approach served its purpose, and served it well. But now, I want other young entrepreneurs, especially women, to see that it's possible to rebuild, to not just survive, but to thrive, after losing everything. I want them to know that betrayal can be a catalyst for extraordinary growth. She looked at Patricia. Set up the Forbes interview for next week. After Patricia left, Natasha returned to her morning reading. Buried discreetly on page 3 of the business section, a small, almost insignificant item caught her eye. A brief piece about Benjamin and Brittany's divorce proceedings. Apparently, the immense financial stress of Richardson Group's sudden collapse had been too much for their already fragile marriage. Brittany had filed papers citing irreconcilable differences, though sources close to the couple suggested she had abruptly left after discovering the full, terrifying extent of their crippling debt. The article mentioned, with a hint of thinly veiled gossip, that Brittany was reportedly already dating a prominent real estate developer she had met at a country club charity function. The developer was described, with a significant emphasis, as significantly older but financially stable. Natasha felt no surge of triumph, no vindictive satisfaction in learning about Benjamin's compounding personal troubles. If anything, she felt a profound, almost detached pity for him. He had lost everything, not because of her vindictiveness, but because he couldn't see past his own towering ego, couldn't fathom the true source of his prosperity, couldn't understand what he was really dealing with. His downfall wasn't the result of her malicious intent. It was the inevitable crushing consequence of building a fragile house of cards on someone else's foundation, on someone else's unrecognized strength. Her phone buzzed softly with a text message. It was from her mother. Saw the Business Journal article. How are you feeling today, darling? Natasha paused, then typed back a simple, profound truth. Free. Finally. Completely free. And it was true. Utterly and absolutely. For 3 long, arduous years, she had carried the immense weight of Benjamin's betrayal, the gnawing burden of needing to prove him wrong about her worth, about her capabilities. The public confrontation at the gala had lifted that burden from her shoulders, a psychological emancipation. She no longer needed his validation, his acknowledgement, his approval. She had proven to herself irrevocably that she was stronger, more capable, and far more powerful than he could ever possibly imagine. A gentle knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Come in. To her surprise, Thomas Williams entered, looking somewhat nervous, uncharacteristically hesitant. Natasha, I hope you don't mind me stopping by without an appointment. I wanted to speak with you about something personal, something important. Of course, Thomas, please sit down, Natasha said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. He settled into the chair and cleared his throat. I've been thinking a lot about what happened at the gala, about everything you revealed that night. I wanted you to know that I think what you did was remarkable, truly extraordinary. Thank you, Natasha replied, but I'm not sure it was remarkable. It was just necessary. No, I disagree, Thomas countered gently, his gaze earnest. You could have destroyed Benjamin quietly, behind the scenes, without anyone ever knowing it was you. Instead, you forced him to confront the devastating truth about himself publicly. You made him face the immediate, undeniable consequences of his actions in front of everyone he had tried so desperately to impress, to manipulate. Thomas leaned forward in his chair, his voice imbued with conviction. More importantly, Natasha, you showed everyone in that room that they had been fundamentally underestimating you. You changed how every single person there thinks about power, about true success, and about the dangerous assumptions we so often make about people based on superficial appearances or past circumstances. Natasha considered his words, a quiet hope stirring within her. I truly hope some good comes from it. I hope other people who have been dismissed or underestimated might find some inspiration in seeing that it's possible to rebuild, to redefine their lives, and to thrive beyond anyone's expectations. They will, Natasha, I'm certain of it, Thomas assured her, a genuine smile spreading across his face. In fact, that's part of why I'm here. My daughter just graduated from business school, and she's struggling a bit to find her footing in the corporate world. She's brilliant, truly, but she's facing the same kind of dismissive attitudes, the same gender biases you faced with Benjamin. Would you consider mentoring her, Natasha? Even just an hour of your time would mean the world. The request surprised Natasha, but it also filled her with a profound sense of purpose, a new direction for her immense power. I'd be honored to meet with her, Thomas. Absolutely. Thank you, he said, relief washing over his face. I think you could teach her things about resilience, about vision, about strategic thinking that she'll never learn in any classroom, in any textbook. After Thomas left, Natasha walked to her window and looked out over the sprawling city, a silent, powerful monarch gazing upon her kingdom. From her office, she could clearly see the building where Richardson Group used to be located, a physical reminder of Benjamin's vanished empire. The space was now vibrantly occupied by a cutting-edge tech startup, one of the innovative companies she had helped finance and nurture through Sterling Enterprises. She thought about the woman she had been 3 years ago sitting in that cheap, desolate motel room with just $27 in her pocket and a heart shattered into a million pieces. That woman, in her deepest despair, would never have imagined the breathtaking view from this office or the sprawling, formidable empire she would, against all odds, painstakingly build. But that woman had also possessed something Benjamin, in his arrogance, had never recognized, had never truly understood, an unbreakable spirit, an unyielding tenacity, and an unwavering determination to rise, stronger and more powerful than ever, from any fall, no matter how catastrophic. The intercom buzzed softly. Ma'am, you have a visitor. She says her name is Eleanor Richardson and that she's your mother. Natasha smiled, a warm, genuine smile that lit up her entire face. Send her up, Patricia. A few minutes later, her mother entered the magnificent office, looking around in utter amazement at the luxurious space, her eyes wide with pride. Baby, this is incredible. I'm so incredibly proud of what you've accomplished, my dear. Thank you, Mama, Natasha said, stepping forward to embrace her mother tightly. I truly couldn't have done it without your unwavering love and support during those dark, dark days. Eleanor hugged her daughter tightly, her eyes glistening. I brought you something, she said, pulling a small, wrapped package from her purse, her hands trembling slightly. I've been saving it for the right moment, a moment like this. Natasha carefully opened the package to find a simple picture frame containing a cherished photo from her college graduation. In the picture, she was young, radiant, hopeful, surrounded by loving family, ready to take on the entire world with an innocent enthusiasm. I want you to remember her, Eleanor said softly, her voice thick with emotion. That young woman who believed with all her heart that she could do anything she set her mind to. She was right, Natasha. She was absolutely right. Natasha placed the framed photo on her desk, carefully positioning it where she could see it every single day, a constant reminder of her journey, of her own inner strength. You know what the best part is, Mama? She said, her voice filled with a quiet, powerful joy. I'm not done yet. This is just the beginning. As the late afternoon sun streamed through her office windows, casting long, golden shadows across the room, Natasha Richardson, founder and CEO of Sterling Enterprises, anonymous philanthropist, and now one of the most successful and respected business leaders in the city, began with a renewed sense of purpose to plan her next acquisition, her next strategic move, her next grand act of creation. Benjamin had been wrong about almost everything he had ever said or thought about her, but he had, in a twisted, unintended way, been right about one crucial thing. Losing dead weight was exactly what she had needed to soar. She had just never, in her wildest dreams, imagined that Benjamin Richardson, the man who had promised her the world, would be the very dead weight she needed to lose to find her true, limitless sky.